Welcome viewers to the series Exploring Careers and Innovation. This episode is titled Opportunities in Fintech, Crossroads of Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship in the Financial Services Industry. My name is Michael Calvey from the class of 2021 at Middlebury College, and I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker, Andres Fontao, class of 96, partner at Rainmaking for Spain and Latin America, and co-founder and managing partner at Finnovista. Welcome and thank you for joining us, Andres.
Michael, thank you so much for hosting me, and looking forward to giving back to the Middlebury community as I can.
Middlebury really appreciates it. So to start off, I would just like for you to talk a little bit to what you do professionally. This series explores a number of different ways that innovation is applied to early stage ventures and larger enterprises. Could you please tell us a little bit about the fintech industry, kind of current happenings, how things are going, and where your organization fits in?
For sure. So I think I'll start out with talking a little bit about fintech, right? Before I share a little about what I do, right, at Finnovista and Rainmaking. But so fintech, it's a word, it's a concept that's derived from financial technologies, right? And it's really a concept that's been around for a while, right? Banks, payment companies, insurance companies, they've all been using technology for a very long time, right? As something fundamental to their businesses. But the concept of fintech in modern day, right? In today's world, really, it alludes to startups, right? Technology-based startups that are leveraging, right? Startups that are leveraging technology really to transform and to disrupt the world of financial services, right? So, look at retail banking or corporate banking, look at payments, capital markets, wealth management, just to name a few segments, right? They're all being changed, they're all being transformed, they're all being disrupted by fintechs, right? So some household names out there that probably, right, a lot of the current students are familiar with today, right? Companies like Square or Stripe, SoFi, they're fintechs, right? They're relatively new companies, but they've penetrated the world of financial services. They've achieved adoption, right, amongst their target addressable market, right? And they're worth millions and billions of dollars, right? Chinese fintech today has gone public, right? Valued at, I think it's 36 billion US dollars, right? So that's the concept of fintech, right? I myself, I consider myself an entrepreneur, right? I founded Finnovista 6 years ago. I've been an entrepreneur for a while, right? This is the second startup that I founded, both in the technology space, right? But unlike my previous technology, and I think unlike your more traditional or more popular entrepreneurs, right? Finnovista is not a technology-based company, but rather we're a firm that's smack in the middle between the world of entrepreneurship, the world of startups, and the world of corporates, right? We consider ourselves a venture development and innovation firm. So we're helping startups and we're helping corporates, in this case, bank payment companies, work together, collaborate together to in a collaborative way to design, develop the future of the world of financial services, right? We want to help startups penetrate and disrupt the traditional world of financial services. We want to help the corporates in this space transform and disrupt themselves by approaching and working with startups.
That's really, really interesting. I was wondering if, given your unique position at Finnovista, kind of sitting at the intersection, I suppose, between some of these large organizations and these smaller organizations, could you touch a little bit, especially as it pertains to students, on what it's like to work at a large organization or a smaller one in the fintech space specifically? Because obviously a very different idea.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Historically, they're, very, they're polar opposites, right? In terms of culture, in terms of size, in terms of agility, right? You have the world of banks, right? Which is suits and ties, right? Very structured organizations with processes that are set forth and that have to be followed, right? they're regulated entities for the most part, right? And so they take their approach to business very seriously, right? And it's important to know this, right? And respect it, because, you know, they are managing, right, billions and billions of dollars, right, for their clients, whether they be consumers or large corporates, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you have startups, right, which is more the world of, you know, t-shirts and jeans, right? And while it may just be something superficial, right, and just appearance, right, it goes beyond that, right? You know, startups tend to be smaller organizations, a lot less structured, right, and looking to be able to act and react, right, in a much more agile and nimble way, right, as they grow, as they scale their businesses, right, and then become, right, much larger organizations that can compete or collaborate head to head with the more traditional players, right? So I think from a cultural perspective, they are two very different types of organizations, right? In terms of mission, they tend to be very aligned, right? In that they're looking to serve whatever their consumer or you know, whatever their direct to consumer or direct to business market may be, right? And in that sense, right, there's a baseline expectation. There's an expectation that there's a baseline knowledge of financial services, right? You know, so as an employee, right, you should have, you know, whether you're working at a bank or at a startup that's, you know, that's a fintech, right? You should have that basic understanding of financial services, right? Obviously, technology comes into play, right? And as banks start to adapt more and more technology, right, there's an expectation as well on both sides that you do have at least a minimum understanding, right, of the different technologies that are being used and applied by players on either side of the spectrum.
It's really interesting. Thank you for bringing up the idea of technology as it relates to this, because I'm sure that'll be very interesting to students. Could you just touch a little bit more concretely for students looking to enter the fintech field? How might they decide between going to like a larger fintech organization, like a more established one, like you mentioned, Stripe or Square, one of those, or like the real cutting edge of startups, like 10-person company? What kind of students would choose which and why, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, a lot of it comes down to appetite for risk, right? You know, if you're looking for something more stable, something more structured, you know, maybe an organization that has a set out defined development path or program, right, for undergraduates, you may want to go into, you know, a larger fintech, right? Someone like Stripe or Square, who has the financing, you know, who has the structure and the processes in place already, right? If you're, you know, if your appetite for risk is greater, right? You're a little more creative. You're looking for a little more adventure, looking for some more adrenaline, right? You know, I'd say, you know, look for something smaller, right? They may not necessarily have the funding, right? That a Square or a Stripe or a PayPal have, right? But there's definitely a lot more excitement, I think, right, in going there. And there's going to be an opportunity to really, you know, get your feet wet in different roles, right, as you help build something from the ground up, rather than entering something that's already built and established.
Absolutely. I think that is a really exciting opportunity for a lot of people, for sure, being able to do that. Thank you for speaking to the contrast as well between the different kinds of organizations. I was wondering if now, kind of from your perspective as someone who's like been an investor and been helping funnel investments into Latin America and kind of helping enable this whole ecosystem, how would a fintech be different if you're thinking about it in an international development setting rather than kind of a domestic US setting? So like Square versus, like, I don't know, like Mercado Libre, PagSeguro, kind of maybe some of the smaller ones even in Latin America, you know, some of the kind of real startup-y stuff. How would that compare?
Right. Great question. Yeah, and I should have noted at the beginning, right? I mean, our work at Finnovista actually is very focused on Latin America, right? So in developing and emerging markets. And the concept of fintech is very different, right? Well, it looks to solve, right, same or similar problems, right? Your addressable market is very different, right? When we go into Latin America, and if you look at it from the perspective or from the lens of financial inclusion, it's a market in a whole where more than 50% of the population does not have access to formal financial services, right? They don't have a bank account for savings. They don't have access to credit, right? They don't have plastic, right? Credit cards or debit cards. They don't have digital wallets, right, on their phones. Hence, right, fintech does help solve that problem, right, in developing and emerging markets, right? America, actually, that's where we see, right, in a lot of the work that we do, right, both from the investment perspective, but also in just working with the startups and the corporates, that's where we see the largest opportunity, right? 50% of the 360 million people that make up the population of all of Latin America, right, do not have access to a formal financial do not have access to formal financial services, right? But they do have a telephone, right? They do have access to technology, right? It may not be the most sophisticated technologies, right? It may not be your latest iPhone 12 or 13 or wherever we're at right now, but it is, technology that they have access to, right? There is broadband, and hence that technology enables them to start having access to at least basic financial services, right? Some type of savings account, some type of credit or loan, right? That will help them to start building a credit score, building a financial footprint, right? That can later down the line in their lives, right? Allow them to access more sophisticated products or services from financial services, right? So from a development perspective and from an international development perspective, financial inclusion, right, is the key denominator, right, or the common denominator between fintech and development, right? We've done some research at Finnovista, right, and we found that more than 40% of the fintechs that are currently operating in Latin America are actually focused on that segment of the population, which today is excluded from the formal financial banking or financial services industry, right? So we already see, right, that it is having an impact, right? And our expectation is that it will continue to grow.
That's really interesting. I certainly think that the opportunities in this space are quite immense. One of the things that I know, at least for me, as someone who is definitely considering entering into this industry and kind of pursuing a career, and I will hopefully be pursuing this kind of career shortly. If a student at Middlebury College is interested in kind of making an impact globally on this in this international development setting, what would be the best way for them straight out of college or while they're still in university to start angling towards that, or to kind of start considering opportunities in the development space?
Yeah, so I think for me, there are two main players, right, at this crossroads of fintech, financial inclusion, international development, right, where current students or recent graduates can start looking at, right? And one is on the investment side, right? So there's a lot of venture capital funds that are focused, right? They classify themselves as impact investors that are focused specifically on financial inclusion, right? So one of them that comes to mind is a fund called Quona, right, which is part of the Acción group, right, which is very present here in the U.S. But Quona specifically is investing in early stage startups focused on financial inclusion, hence operating in the fintech space in Latin America. They also do Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, right? But Quona is just one example, right? On the investment space, I think that's an interesting career path to look into, right? Which combines, right, the development with fintech, right, and as well as some other careers, right, like such as financial services, right, as an investor per se. The other group that I think, or the other segment or career opportunity that I think also hits this crossroads are the development banks, right? So in Latin America, we have the Inter-American Development Bank, right? Based in Washington, but with a presence throughout the region, right? We also have CAF, right? The Corporación Andina de Fomento, right? I'm not sure what the English naming of CAF is, but it's another Latin American development bank, right? And they too, right? Both of them are very active in this space, right? Looking to do what they can to develop the fintech ecosystem, to evangelize about the opportunity, the technologies, the solutions, right, in helping solve what is a very big and relevant problem in the region, right, a development problem in the region, right, which has been, right, the lack of access to formal financial services. So I think, starting, if someone's more interested in taking the investment route, right, I think, looking at impact investors that are focused on on financial inclusion is one route. Focusing on development banks is another route, right? I think the third route, Michael, is looking at the startups that are operating in the region, right? As I said, right, more than 40% of them are actually consider themselves to be serving the financially excluded segment of the population, right? There's more than 2,000 fintechs operating in Latin America today. And I'm sure more than one of them would be happy to take on, right? Employees coming from the US and interested in learning and developing their career, right, down this path.
That's really interesting. I really appreciate you sharing your insights on this. And this is definitely going to be a topic that's very interesting to a lot of Middlebury students with the international focus that we have here, and just kind of a general desire to do good around the world, which I feel like reverberates a lot around campus. But it's hard to sometimes that.
If you don't mind me just interrupting, before you jump into that question, right? Just a little anecdote here is, I've well, in pre-COVID environment, right, in a pre-COVID world, I used to spend quite a bit of time at fintech conferences across the region, just connecting with startups, investors, executives from the financial services industry, right? And going back to last year around this time at a fintech conference in Mexico, I was actually sharing coffee with 5 or 6 Middlebury graduates, right? Different years, right? Different majors. But there was an entrepreneur, Middlebury grad who was an entrepreneur, right, operating in the fintech space. There were a couple investors, and there were a few that were working for development banks, right? So I can say, right, even alumni, right, are operating kind of these different worlds of fintech in development world in Latin America. So yeah, there's I think a significant community of Middlebury alums already operating in the space, which makes it even more attractive, I think, for existing students.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting point and a perfect segue into my next point. But I think, yeah, it's great to kind of see for us as students that not only are there people who we can go talk to and kind of places and institutions already in place, but also Middlebury students have done it. We have the correct education and in some cases the correct tools to actually start approaching these problems. So I think that's really exciting. For the next part of this discussion, I would really like for you to touch a little bit more on your career path through fintech. Maybe if you could first start with a little bit about your role at Finnovista today, what it looks like, perhaps where you're based at the moment in relation to COVID. And then from there, kind of just work backwards to see what it takes to get to the position you're in right now. Because for Middlebury students, this is the hardest thing. They see this end goal and we're like, I would love to be there and I would love to do this, but then it's impossible to figure out the path to arrive there.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'll try, so I'll go backwards. I usually go from beginning to end, but we'll go from end
as is easy
to the beginning. But no, let's give it a try. But yeah, so my current role, so Finnovista, I'm one of the 2 co-founders, and it's a company that we founded 6 years ago, right? I was living in Spain at the time. I'm currently based in the U.S., right? I'm in New Jersey, which is where I call home. In a pre-COVID environment, I was spending 2 weeks per month in the air, right, and on the ground, primarily in Mexico, which is where we have our largest office. We have offices in Madrid, which is where we founded the company, and in Mexico City. Okay, and so pre-COVID environment, I would spend 2 weeks a month in Mexico and/or other cities across Latin America, meeting with startups, investors, and our clients, right? In a post-COVID environment, right? Since March, I've been locked down here in my home. But thanks to technology, I've been able to stay connected, and we've been able to keep business going as usual, right? Our team as well, right? Very flexible in that sense, right? And everyone has adapted well to working remotely, right? And in a dislocated manner. But anyway, so Finnovista, I've been at this for the past 6 years as partner. As managing partner and co-founder, I do a little bit of everything, right? But just generally, responsible for making sure that that the business is operating, right? That we're able to maintain our path, our strategy, right? To be able to keep on being a sustainable business and keep growing, right? I do focus on some things more than others, right? My business partner has a specific interest, more on the marketing side, so he kind of oversees the marketing stuff. We both do business development. I like to manage some key accounts, so I find myself spending more time with larger clients. And then there are things that we both have a preference for. So we're both spending time with startups, for example. We're both spending time doing research or spending time with other corporates, right? But that's kind of how I spend my day-to-day, right? And it's just, again, overseeing that the business is operating, right? And that we're staying on our path, right? And on our mission. As like any company, we have a strategy, right? We have a plan. And we want to make sure that we stay on that path, right, to achieve those objectives and those goals that we have. 6 years ago, right, I did find myself doing a lot more of everything than I do today, right? Just because 6 years ago it was just me and my business partner, right? Today we're 20 people that form part of the team, right? So we are able to distribute work more evenly, right? And I am in a position now where I can kind of pick and choose a little more, right? The things that drive that drive me and that I'm more passionate about, right? But again, that's just, I think, consequence of being able to build a more sustainable business, right? And organization. Before founding Finnovista, I was working at a bank. I was the head of mobile. Sorry, I lied. Before Finnovista, I was at a fintech, right? A large B2B fintech that was market leader in the United States. Expanding into Europe. I was living in Europe at the time, and they took me on as one of their first employees in Europe to help them expand into a new market, right? I was with this fintech for about a year and a half before they had been acquired by a larger software company based out of the UK, right? At the time of the sale, I decided to leave that company to help to help start Finnovista. Spent time in financial services working for a bank before that, which is really, that was my first exposure, my baptism, right, into the world of financial services, right? It was a small retail bank that was head of mobile financial services. So started becoming acclimated, right, to both the world of banking and the world of technology, right, as it was applied to financial services. And before that, I spent all my professional career, or most of my professional career, in the world of telecommunications, right? Looking at it from a business perspective, always, right, having product management, product marketing, or working as a consultant for mobile telecommunications operators, both in Mexico and in Europe. But that really, for me, that was first time I was exposed to the transformation and disruption of an industry, right? And that transformation, that disruption was spearheaded by technology startups, right? So the likes of Spotify's and Google's and Apple's, right, when they were still startups, right, were the ones that were significantly transforming the world of telecommunications, right? That's why I ended up founding Finnovista, right? It's because I was convinced that just like it occurred in telco, and just like it was already occurring with the likes of Ubers and Spotify's and Airbnb's as they were disrupting their respective industries, I was convinced that this was going to happen in financial services, right? And the reason we started Finnovista was to accelerate that change, to accelerate that transformation, right? And we wanted to identify early stage startups. We wanted to work with those startups, right? And help them accelerate change in an industry which in my mind, in our minds, right, was stuck in the Middle Ages, right? And unlike other industries that were transformed, that were disrupted, financial services is a complicated industry. It is very complex. It's highly regulated, right? Even the technology stacks, right? The technologies they use and the technology stacks that are built within a financial institution, right, are very complicated, right? So for an entrepreneur, more often than not, they've either spent time in the industry, right, or they have specific know-how and access to know and to learn the innards of the industry, right, or they have to rely on partnerships and collaborations, right, in order to bring change to this industry, right? And so that's kind of where the idea for starting Finnovista comes from, right? Before that, and now just going back to when I graduated from Middlebury, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I remember researching and interviewing with investment banks and consulting firms. I think those were the two most common jobs, right, that were looked at, or career paths that were looked at by Middlebury grads, at least when I studied, right? In addition to whoever already had a clear intention of going to graduate school, right, for medical school or to law school or whatnot, right? To me, it wasn't very clear, and I just kind of thought, okay, let me look at opportunities in investment banking or consulting. I ended up working for a law firm as a paralegal, right? Back then, in the back of my mind, I think one of the options I had considered as an IPE major was going to law school, right? I had never been exposed to a career in law, right? I didn't have anyone in my direct or extended family that was a lawyer, so I thought, being a paralegal would be a good opportunity to expose myself to that career, right, and get to know a little more about that profession before committing another 3 years of education and about $100,000, which was what the cost of law school was back then. So well, let me give it a try first, right? So I started working for white shoe corporate law firm based in New York City. Ended up only spending a year there because I quickly realized that it was not the career or the profession that I wanted to pursue. About 90% of the hours that I worked that year that I billed that hour for that law firm were focused on one client, which is the Mexican industry, a large Mexican holding company with operations in multiple industries. So I actually worked on their IPO, right, on the legal side, but became friends with some of the executives at this company. So I ended up quitting my job as a paralegal and moving down to Mexico a year after that, right? And that's where I started becoming exposed to the world of finance, the world of business, and the world of telecommunications. One of the businesses that they owned was actually a mobile telecommunications operator, right? That they were just starting up, right? So that also was my first exposure into the world of startups and entrepreneurship, right? So I see my path really as being one that I've been able to test different career paths or opportunities, right? As I got a clearer notion as to what I wanted to do, I complemented it with an MBA, right, in between, and it all converged, right, with me and my business partner, right, starting Finnovista in 2012, right? So yeah, sorry, that was kind of a long-winded response to your question.
That was exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, I have a couple of follow-ups about that, but I think for like what you kind of really took home with that is showing that it's not like you graduated from Middlebury and were like, okay, I'm going to go in 20 years start this company, or in 10 years start this company. So I intend to like do this and then go work here and then have this experience. It kind of just happens and falls into place. And it's interesting how like you were working on that account and so you met those people. I think that it's kind of reassuring to us, at least for me, to know that I don't have to have it all planned out and that you just go have an experience, see how it pans out and see what you like, and then kind of adjust and move as you go. You did mention that you got an MBA. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on the role of advanced degrees in fintech and kind of whether it's something that's necessary, whether maybe now kind of in this difficult post-COVID job environment, maybe it makes sense for students to go and get an MBA now if it's difficult to find a job. Could you just touch on that a little bit?
Yes. So despite the fact that I studied, I went to graduate school and received my MBA. I think today, and my employees, are constantly asking, right? Telling me that they're thinking about doing an MBA and whatnot. And my response, more often than not, is no, right? Of course, it's not, one size fits all, right? It's not, the same answer to everyone. It kind of depends where you want to take your career. But I today, I would argue that and this may not be the most PC, right, or the most expected response, right? But I don't see a whole lot of value in a graduate degree in business, right? When you can get the same knowledge, right, from a more practical perspective, right? You can get that by working at a startup, right? By working at a business, right? And so for someone that wants to pursue a career in fintech, for example, right? I think there's so much more that you can learn, right? At a much lower cost, right? Hey, just raise your hand and say, I'll volunteer to work with this founder or with this CTO for a year or two, right? You don't have to pay anything, right? And there's just so much more that I think you'll be exposed to and that you can learn that will help forge your path, your career in fintech, right? Than shelling out whatever an MBA costs nowadays, right? And 2 years, which, yeah, okay, so there will be a lot of theoretical learnings that you can take back, right? And again, I don't want to underestimate the value of that, but I just think we can get a lot more out of finding something more practical, a more a real life opportunity to learn the theoretical stuff, but also put it into practice, right? And I think my suggestion, if given the opportunity, my recommendation to anyone would be, raise your hand, volunteer to shadow the co-founder, the founder, the CEO, or the CTO of any top fintech, right, in the US, in Latin America, wherever it is in the world, right? And I think, what you can extract, the learnings and the experience that you can extract from that, right, will be a lot more valuable than an MBA per se.
That's really, really helpful advice. I'm sure a lot of students will really take that to heart. I was wondering if now we could turn a little bit to kind of more practical advice for current students, because a lot of the viewers that are going to be watching this conversation later are going to be maybe first-year students, second-year students who are just exploring their opportunities. Maybe we'll have some last-year students who have just a few months left, like myself, of time at Middlebury. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on what kinds of skills and what kinds of experiences you think are valuable to pick up now before we graduate, or maybe as soon as we graduate, that would then help us break into the fintech space, or would be helpful to have down the line.
Yeah, that's a good question, Michael. So what kinds of skills, right? I think, looking at it from a more, conceptual perspective, I think critical thinking and analytical skills are important, right? And those are the skills that I actually value the most for my education at Middlebury, right? I think, being able to develop, fine tune, right, hone those skills, I think is very important, right? And then complement them with sector or vertical specific skills, right? Technology being one of them, right? And I'm not saying you have to go out and learn. I don't know how to code, right? I want to learn, and I'm hoping I can find time to learn. Right? It doesn't have to be at that level, right, of understanding, right? But yeah, do understand, right? What are the technologies that are really driving change, innovation, and disruption in financial services, right? Things like blockchain, artificial intelligence, big data, right? Just to name a few, right? But it is important to have an understanding, what's behind those concepts, right? What are the technologies that are behind those concepts? How and where are they applicable to the world of financial services, right? Because it is those technologies and others, right, that are driving change and transformation in the industry, right? So right, I think it's important, if you're going to pursue a career in fintech, right, it's important to know, right, what are those concepts, right, that are driving the innovation within the industry.
It's really interesting. I appreciate that insight once again, Andres. I was wondering if you could maybe touch a little bit on like potentially summer experiences, because you know what it's like at Middlebury when you're looking for things to fill your summers with. How do you pass the time while still gaining experiences? What kind of experiences do you think are most relevant, or would be the kinds of things that maybe you wouldn't be able to get later on once you graduate that are worth picking up now that you think would be particularly useful to a career in fintech or even generally?
So I think, again, I think interning, interning primarily at a startup, right? I think would be a great opportunity, right? If a student is able to find that type of opportunity, right? Get to know the business, right? All around, right? And not only will it give you a clear understanding of the world and business in general, right? And just how any type of organization is structured. But it will also, right, I think, help you start to understand the world of startups, right? Being able to spend time, right, within a startup, right, understanding how the product organization is structured, how the marketing organization is structured, right? Different concepts that they're using, right, in terms of product development, right? So, right, understanding firsthand, what does agile mean, right? Or what does growth hacking mean? Right, I think can be very valuable, right? I think that's a good way to spend the summer, right? Interning, right? For a fintech, I think going venture capital. Again, I think venture capital, gives you not only that 35,000-foot view of the industry, right? If it's a VC firm that's focused on fintech, right? But it also helps you start understanding where those analytical and critical thinking skills, right, are applicable, right? I think that's one area where you really have to have those skills, that skill set, right, set out, right, and ready to be applied. So yeah, I think internships is a great opportunity. Aside from that, I definitely see that there's a lot of content out there, right, on the web, right? There's I think because of the pandemic, there's a lot more content. There's now more than ever, there's content out there on the web, webinars and research, right? And it's all readily available for free, right? Just start reading as much as possible, right, and learning about the trends in the industry, right? Yeah.
That's all very inspiring. Thank you so much. For my last follow-up, I was wondering if you could briefly just come back a little bit to the international development space and kind of for Middlebury students now, say I'm a sophomore pursuing an IP&E major, is there any different advice or specific advice you would give to someone who wants to end up working in Latin America, for example, or maybe Africa or Southeast Asia in a similar capacity?
Yeah, so for me, I think, if possible, I would try to spend time on the ground in the market, right? I think the perspective you have on development in an emerging market, right? In Africa and Asia and India or Latin America, the perspective you have is very different, right? From Middlebury, right? A small town in the Green Mountains in Vermont, right? Than it is from the hustle and bustle of Mexico City, right? A city with, a suburban area with 100 million or 120 million people, right? And so if at all possible, right, whether it be through study abroad programs or through summer internships or through just, a gap period that you want to take, right? And granted, this may not be as easy now because of the pandemic, right? Because, movement is limited, right? But to the extent possible, right, get on a plane and spend time on the ground, right? Understanding the market, networking with individuals who are in that field, right? We haven't referred to this, right, throughout the conversation, but I think, something that, one of the assets that I value the most, right, and just as I developed my career, right, and I wish I would have started doing it beforehand, right, it's just building out a network, right? And I think I had the tools available to me when I was at Middlebury. I just never saw any value in it back then, right? So if I were to go back to 1996, right, and well, that's when I graduated, but even earlier, right, to 1992 when I started, right, I do wish I would have focused a little more of my time as I thought about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to take my life and my career, right? I wish I would have invested a little more of that time and thought in the importance of networking, right? So again, to respond to your question though, if possible, right, get on a plane, go spend time, understand the market, get to know the people, and start building out your network, right? In that field, in that country, in that region.
That's really useful advice. Again, I think that definitely, especially within the context of Middlebury, with how many study abroad programs we have all over the world, and just even job opportunities with mid alums for internships and stuff like that. I think that's actually really valuable advice. That's very actionable for a lot of people. So I really appreciate that. But one quick follow up, just on the note of networking, because this is a word that we're bashed over the head with so much. They're like, you should be like networking, you should be doing this and that. It's always like, wow, like, well, where do you start? What would you do? Like, actually, now that you know everything that you know about it, how would you just cold email people from Middlebury? Would you add them on LinkedIn and start a conversation? What would be your path, and how would you go about actually cultivating a network?
Yeah, I would definitely, use networking platforms that are out there. LinkedIn is one of them. Middlebury has their own as well, right? And so I think, probably they complement each other well. For the most part, I think Middlebury alums, in my experience, that Middlebury alums have been open and receptive, right, to networking. And so yeah, definitely leverage those tools. I think the second recommendation is, right, try to get you want to go into fintech, right? There's a lot of fintech conferences out there. Right? Again, this may change because of the pandemic, right? But let's assume that we're back to normal, in the next 12, 18 months, right? And you have fintech conferences happening in New York City. Yeah, I saw that. But let's assume that we have those fintech conferences happening in New York City, in San Francisco, in Mexico City, or wherever in the world they're taking place, right? Try to go to one, right? And I know they have very high access costs, right? Usually, you have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to get into one of these conferences. But, as a student, you have preferred pricing. As a student, you can even volunteer your time, right? We've done it, right? We actually organized fintech conferences in Miami, in Mexico City, and in Colombia. And we've always opened our doors to students, right, who are willing to, help us out organizing the conference, whether it be recruiting speakers or helping write a post-event blog post, whatever it is, right? But just like volunteer some of your time, right? And you can get your foot in the door, right? And just being able to get into a conference with hundreds or thousands of attendees, right? Just starting to rub shoulders, have a drink, share a conversation with those experts, right? Is a way to start building out your network as well, right? There's nothing like being able to meet face to face, right? Despite all these great technologies that we have, right? It's that, and especially in Latin markets and developing markets, right? It's the trust that is built in face-to-face environment, right? Is irreplaceable.
Yeah, I really hope we'll be able to go back to those kinds of face-to-face interactions shortly and conduct like these kinds of interviews over a coffee
Right.
or drink instead of this. But we do what we can. Maybe just before we wrap up, actually, we mentioned the pandemic in passing a few times, and obviously this is completely changed our lives. I know for me here, I'm on campus at Middlebury right now, and you wouldn't recognize it if you went to walk down the street almost. It's crazy. Everything is so different, and I think that goes for most people's day-to-day lives as well. Could you talk a little bit about how it's affecting the fintech space? Obviously, we're hoping that everything is better, but like say on the odd chance that it's just like we have to always keep precautions and in-person interactions that aren't the same 2 years down the line. How do things look different now compared to a year or two ago? And are there new opportunities maybe that opens?
So the pandemic has accelerated fintech adoption globally, right? And more so in developing markets, right? I can specifically talk about Latin America, right? Which is where I spend most of my time at work, right? Or focusing on when at work. And so yeah, I mean, the fact that we have people have limited mobility, right? Has meant that they can't visit, those who are banked cannot visit their bank branches, right? Those who shop, right, cannot go to the store, right? And so there's been a big e-commerce explosion in Latin America as well, right? That obviously has benefited the fintech industry as well, just because there's a higher demand for digital payments, right? For payments infrastructure. So the likes of a Stripe, right? For example, right? Or you mentioned Mercado Libre earlier in the conversation, right? They're a big e-commerce player in Latin America, but they've launched their own payments platform as well, right? Just because the opportunity is so large, right? So overall, right? Yeah, I think fintech, and this is both at a global perspective, but more so for Latin America, right? It has benefited, right, from the pandemic because there's a lot more demand for services and solutions being offered by these countries, right? This is important. This is relevant, right? And even when things go back to normal, we expect this to be a big paradigm shift, right? I think there was, for those that are unbanked, there's always been a reluctance to go, right, and to entrust a provider, a bank, or an alternative, right, player like a fintech, right, with your savings, right? Or if you've needed credit, right, it's always been, right, a little more difficult, right, to trust to someone that you can't see or that you can't shake hands with, right? But I think what this pandemic has done is really has accelerated the consumer and the small business willingness, right, to start engaging, right, in transactions through fintechs, right? So I would expect, right, this to continue going, right? It doesn't mean that people are going to stop going to bank branches, right? It doesn't mean that people are going to stop going to supermarkets, but it does mean, I think, right, that it does represent a tipping point for fintech adoption globally, and again specifically for Latin America.
Well, that's really exciting. I'm sure a lot of students here will find that very heartening because we hear so much about all the downsides of the pandemic and all the terrible things that are happening and how lives are ruined. But I mean, with any change, there's always upsides and there's always beneficiaries. And I think definitely fintech and financial services are really hitting an inflection point. It's actually been like kind of amazing to watch like a decade's worth of change happen over the course of 6 months and just seeing it all go through.
Michael, I've in my conversations with banks in Latin America, I've heard literally, some of them tell me, they had 5 or 10 year transformation projects lined up, right? And things that they hadn't had planned to implement until 10 years down the road, right? They've had to implement in a matter of weeks, right? Out of necessity, right? It was either that or, right, they don't have a way of contacting or communicating with their clients, right? I mean, talking about microfinance institutions in Latin America, right, who don't have sophisticated technology platforms, right, or who don't have sophisticated customer interaction channels, because a lot of their relationship up until March was based on the face-to-face or on the community, right? Today, right, they've had to, right, change or be changed, right? So yeah, it's completely right what you're saying.
Great. Well, Andres, thank you again. With that, we'll close it up. I wanted just to thank you on behalf of all of Middlebury's current and students and anyone else who's going to end up watching this. It's really helpful for all of us.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks to you for organizing this, right, and for facilitating the conversation. And just my offer to anybody who is watching this, right, and anyone that wants to go a little deeper, wants to explore opportunities in fintech in Latin America. And who knows, maybe even, right, an internship or down the line, a job with us, right? Happy to connect one-to-one, right? I don't know how you're going to share, if you can share my contact details, but the audience out there can look me up on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Always happy to hear from Middlebury grads and alumni.
Much appreciated. Well, with that, I'd like to conclude this episode of our series, Exploring Careers and Innovation. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes in this series. I also want to encourage you to tune in to other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab in the CCI website. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching.